The next part of our discussion will be on governance challenges in making a new world. The session will be anchored by Dr. Janaki Nair. She's a historian and academic, currently a professor at the Center for Historical Studies at JNU. Dr. Nair's research focuses on modern Indian history and legal, urban, social, and cultural history. Presently, she worked at Madras Institute of Development Studies and Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta. She has been awarded the New India Book Prize in 2005. Ma'am, can we have you on stage?
Welcome to all of you, but let me first start by thanking Leo at Environmental Support Group and Bhargavi for warmly inviting me to this session. I am no expert on environment, but Leo has assured me that coming from the margins is a good thing in such an event. So thank you very much for having me here, and I feel greatly honored, partly because this is such a distinguished panel, and it will be impossible for me to introduce each of them with the right amount of introduction that they deserve. So, and in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it extremely short. I'm also going to rejig the names because there are a couple of people in our panel who have to leave slightly early. So I would like to start with Mr. Ravichander. But I request all the members on this panel to please come on to the stage. So if I can request Dr. A R Vasavi to come on stage, Joe Athialy, Dunu Roy, Prem Chandavarkar, Dr. Satyajit Mayor, V. Ravichander, Asma Naseer, Akkai Padmashali, and Anand Yagnik. Please come on to the stage, and I will change the order of the presentations slightly from that list, which I have before me, because as I mentioned, there are two people who would like to leave slightly early. Yes, I'll sit here. Thank you. Thank you, Akkai, for doing perhaps what I should have done to honor the two people who have kept this going for the last 25 years and has accomplished so much. I mean, I was simply blown away when I was looking at the website and seeing the wide range of things that has been accomplished over these last 25 years. We have a panel which is entitled Governance Challenges in Making a New World. And each of our speakers has actually been given a separate part of the subject to discuss, and I hope they are aware of that. So we hope to get perspectives from very, very different kinds of registers in this panel. As I said, I'm going to rejig this panel a little bit because there are a couple of us who need to leave shortly. So we will start with V. Ravichander, and we will continue with Akkai Padmashali, who will be second. Then we will move on, as this list has had it, Joe Athialy, Dunu Roy, Prem Chandavarkar, Satyajit Mayor, Asma Naseer, and ending with Anand Yagnik. I hope that is all right. Each of you has about 7 to 8 minutes. I have thankfully been relieved of the burden of having to check the speakers and remind them that their time is over. I'm a bit of a martinet on that, so I'm really glad I've been relieved of that duty. Instead, you'll hear a beep. I request you to stop when you hear that beep, because otherwise you'll hear yet another beep, and then finally your mic will be turned off. So welcome to all of you on that note. Let me request V. Ravichander. He needs actually nobody on this panel needs any introduction, but let me just say that he is the director of the most happening place in Bangalore, the Bangalore International Center. And so he's going to talk about securing local governance for inclusive transformations as part of this panel.
Thanks, Janaki. So the subject is securing local governance for inclusive transformation, and I'll try to deconstruct that. So my claim possibly to be here is over the last 23 years, one's been involved working with government in various capacities since 2000. And a few years ago, I wrote a 1,000-page report on how to govern Bangalore, which no one has read. So I think at least that gives me the claim to speak at a gathering like this. And the session I'm going to after this is actually at a church where the subject is Bangalore problems and possibilities. And somebody said, just go there and say, let us pray. And that possibly is the only way to fix the place. Now, in securing local governance, let me just take the local governance part first. You know, we have a constitutional defect at birth. So when the framers framed the Constitution, the center and state, Tier 1 and Tier 2, was well described. But unfortunately, when it came to the third tier, instead of going the whole hog and making it a third tier of local government, they used the expression local body. So whether it's a rural local body or an urban local body. And it is a setback from which we haven't recovered to date. The 74th Constitutional Amendment was a fix towards fixing some of the infirmities in the original Constitution. But even if you got the 74th functioning, it still doesn't fix the kind of governance challenges that we have got. Briefly put, the state has an extremely major stake in the running of the city. So essentially, Bangalore and the larger cities and all cities in Karnataka are vassals of the state government. So that's our primary problem in terms of things. The setup is extremely dysfunctional, the way it is set up. The silos of government agencies are designed to withstand a nuclear attack. We want outcomes which require you to thread a solution through agencies, but each of them being territorial in the way they operate, you have a huge challenge. To further compound this, we have various kinds of entities. I mean, there's obviously the city corporation that we all talk about, BBMP, but then you have the parastatals like the BWSSB, BDA, and the like. Then you have the corporations like BESCOM, BMRCL. There are a whole lot of agencies, and the bulk of them actually come under the state control, including the BBMP, which we'd like to think we have a say in, but the interference of the state is hell of a lot. So consequently, we have a series of problems out here. So if we have to secure local governance, I mean, honestly speaking, you need the third tier of city government. Will it happen? Very unlikely, because there is no way that any chief minister of Karnataka is going to let go of their considerable powers with respect to the city, particularly in terms of notification, denotification, and the like. In fact, if you finally give them an option between an empowered Bangalore City mayor, fully empowered, versus the being the chief minister of the state, they might well take the mayor's position if it can be empowered. That's the state of affairs. So in this dysfunctional situation, how do we go about trying to secure? To my mind, while it will be great to roll up everything back into BBMP and have the third tier, not going to happen, we will have to find mechanisms to make the existing dysfunctional structure work. And to my mind, the most important thing out there is really a coordination at the apex level. So it will really have elements of what I would call deep decentralization and appropriate deep decentralization and appropriate centralization. So by the deep decentralization, what I mean is whatever can be done at the lowest level, ward, micro ward, whatever can be done at the lowest level, you get it done there, and with loads and loads of citizen participation and involvement. So, for example, you take something like garbage. That is something that is deeply, it is possible to decentralize it at the local level. You take something like transport. Transport by its very nature is a metropolitan regional level, and you cannot really do it at the decentralized level. So the start for all this, and it's there in that report one did, is, and we set out 600 activity maps for various functions in the government that needs to be done, local government. And you need to really start with the activity map to decide who will do what and at what level. So it needs to follow the subsidiarity principle that what is better done at the lower level is done out there. The important thing when we go down this route is really the wisdom of the crowds and the voice of the citizen. Of late, ward committees have started functioning, but it's still a farce. It's a long way to go to get true citizen participation. But it's my belief that the best custodians of the city are the local citizens. I believe that we need to get to a stage where citizens can monitor was that the beep? Yeah. Okay, good. I'll finish in a minute. Where citizens can monitor output and the spending and the like. Coming to the word inclusive transformation, the framework I would suggest really is a vulnerability framework. It's really not in use, embraced by government or the bureaucrats. But if we actually put in place a vulnerability framework, which is not a one-size-fits-all, so for example, on the streets, the vulnerable people would be the pedestrian, the hawker. On transport, the people who take bus are the vulnerable people. When it comes to flooding, people in low-lying areas are the people who are vulnerable. So if you actually design the city using a vulnerability lens to fix the city, there are chances that the city will work for everybody. Currently, the thinking is more to fix it for the better off people who anyway can exit from the system. I think we just need to invert it and start with the vulnerable people. I believe that that's the way to go in terms of trying to find governance mechanisms which has decentralization and centralization, and also gets into a planning framework which is vulnerability based. That would be my big ideas in this space. Thank you so much. I finished it before time.
Thank you very much for those opening remarks. I was struck by the fact that these are sentiments that were expressed as much as 23 years ago when I began work on my Bangalore book. One was talking about the necessity of decentralization right then. At that time, I think it was Ravindra who was talking about it quite a lot. But nevertheless, it's also a sign of perhaps how these things need to be reiterated if they need to make an impact at all. So thank you very much for those opening remarks. We have next Akkai Padmashali, again someone who really needs no introduction. She is a public speaker, belongs to Ondede.
Yes.
And will be speaking about securing representation of diverse identities in our city.
So congratulations, Environment Support Group. I was just thinking, Leo, this Habba should happen with people on streets, parks, bus stands, cruising sites, sex work spots, because ESG has come from that background. Knowing that you are a working class-led human rights, occupying our spaces, which was not there for so many years, and because of the intervention of Environment Support Group, your intervention in courts, with people's movement, with social justice movement, talking about the importance of what is environment and people, what is environment and the economic system, what is environment and the political system that we are talking today. I think coming from that background, that was my suggestion. Let's do that still. Just 25 years, Silver Jubilee agide, and we want some big party as well. Idu salala, jasti dodda party bekagide. Yeah. Please come. I love to host. Yeah. I think the whole team has really sat here to do this program in such a colorful manner, bringing new people, new faces, new thinking, new perspectives, new ideologies concerned. I think I was remembering 25, 30 years ago, Leo, that I was born a male. I think I want to read this poem. It's very 4 lines. I'm not a male, I'm not a female, I'm not intersex, let me decide my identity. So this phrase which has brought as a poem was 25 years ago. You were struggling as a community of your identity crisis because of your class, because of your caste, because of your profession, because of your culture, because of your existence, because of your identity, because of your representation, and many other stuff. 25 years ago, no one was worried about this community. It's the Hijra community which came together to fight, to get united, to speak about the larger social exclusion part of it. Those 25 years ago, I remember Bhargavi is here and Leo is here. Very few people and institutions which came forward to support the movement of sex workers, to support the movement of sexual minorities is concerned. Because 20 years ago, just 15 years ago, no one was there to speak about you, to talk about you, to sit next to you, to breathe next to you, to share joy, to share some feelings, to share some stories. No one was there. I remember the Kabban Park is a spot where I was a sex worker. I was a beggar, begging on pant shirt, begging on saris, begging, doing sex work on saris and having multiple clients. We occupied that space in Kabban Park saying that this belongs to sex workers and transgender community or the Hijra community. So later on what happened? The rulers, the fundamental practitioners, the people who want to strongly believe the politics of divide and rule. So they wanted to occupy the safer spaces of people. See, the name of metro construction, there is so much of displacement happened. And the direct effect was against sex workers, was against people who are in the street as vendors, for transgender people. So I think joining our hands together and fighting about this importance, why we should quit here, this belongs to us. So traditionally, culturally, in the name of state, you have been bifurcated and made displaced. So where are my people now? We lost Bhagyapalli Bhagiratamma, we lost Kage Priya, we lost Bhagya, many people who were indulging in sex work. We were talking to Leo and team, I think at the ALF office. ಇಲ್ಲ ಲಿಯೋ ನಮ್ದು ಆಫೀಸ್ ನಾವು ಸೆಕ್ಸ್ ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡೋಕೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಪೊಲೀಸ್ ಹಿಂಸೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಕಬ್ಬನ್ ಪಾರ್ಕ್ there is so much of problem, how do we handle and how do we deal this? So we had the space to discuss that point of time, and today the spaces have shrinked. Not only for sexual minorities or sex workers, it's because of your background that you come from, especially if you are in street, you are being discriminated. I think why I brought this concept basically, we do have personal conflicts, personal power hierarchies, differences, ideological perspectives. I think keeping that as a part and bringing this institution to the forefront has really converged communities, converged like-minded thoughts, converged people's issues. I think that journey has begun from that day, and today it's an ongoing struggle. You have seen what is happening in the Supreme Court of India. The government is against one community on the grounds of gender identity and sexual orientation, and the state is saying that we will not support the issues of sexual minorities. If that's the attitude of the state, we should question back, how can a state of majoritarian and a totalitarian can decide against one community's issue? So now I would want to say that it is a confliction between the constitutional authorities. When I say this, it's a confliction between the legislature, the executive, the judiciary, and the civil society movement. Until you gain knowledge about this issue, I think many other sections of society who will be left out in the process, and then we are definitely not going to see development in 21st century. I think until you address the most marginalized section, I think streets should be occupied again back to reconverge, to occupy spaces, to occupy positions, to ensure that we belong to this state, this culture, this tradition, and this nation, of course, the globe. I just learned that so many presentations in the morning was extremely awesome. We learned so many things. As a sexual minority, I was not even aware about what is the importance of environment and environment justice. I think it's a time to all of us again to work with environment support group. As a community, we want to be with environment support group. ಮಾಗಡಿ ಬನ್ನಿ, ಪಾರ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡೋಣ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮತ್ತೊಂದಷ್ಟು ಕಲ್ತ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಣ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಅವಕಾಶ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದ, ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
Thank you very much, Akkai, for those and exemplary timekeeping. But I'm hearing you say two things. One is that you're here, that on the one hand, we've made great progress in terms of acknowledging a new vocabulary, a way of accepting people from different diverse groups into mainstream political discourse, and I think that's a positive thing that you pointed to. You were generally also pointing to the fact that there is a shrinking of public spaces, which is a generalized problem. It's not a problem only for people of or sexual minorities alone. But we'll come to some of these questions perhaps in a minute or two. Let's press on with our panel. We'll move now to Dr. A R Vasavi, again somebody who needs absolutely no introduction, a social anthropologist by training, has worked in the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore before she has moved to Nagavali in Chamarajnagara district and started an organization called Punarchit. So unlike those of us who are only talking about the environment, here is somebody who's actually working to restore a particularly degraded piece of land. And I'll leave her to tell you more about that.
I won't be speaking about our work. Leo, the kind of topic that he allocated to me was about reimagining both socio-economically secure and environmentally diverse or sustainable villages. So it's very broad. I just want to say, before talking about the new imaginaries that are required for rural India or for villages, one needs to look at what is problematic with the dominant imaginaries with which rural India is constructed and treated, and also the way in which agriculture especially is dealt with. These dominant imaginaries are primarily two or three. One is that there has been an inversion of the actual structures of rural India in the dominant imaginary, which is that instead of looking at the caste system as the major deficit of rural India, the caste structure, that is the caste basis of agriculture, has been consolidated and reproduced over the years. It has not been questioned at all. The inverse is that the very rich and sophisticated knowledge systems of agriculture, of ecology, which the morning, many of the speakers highlighted in the morning, that has been erased and eroded very substantially. And I think that is what much of the dominant system has done. Along with that are the two sort of universally accepted regimes or ideas. One is that the rural and agriculture are redundant. It's from the what is called the Lewisian paradigm, is that agriculture and the rural must give way to the urban and the industrial, and that is the pathway of, capitalism, etc., which you know from the Western experience. Matching all this has been the dominant Indian political system that has seen rural India, especially farmers, has both vote banks and has supplicants who must be treated and dealt with only during elections. So with that, only what are called populist programs, which are subsidies, announcing loan moratoria, announcing free electricity, and as you know, 2014, one of the biggest things that swung the vote favored the BJP was what was called Kisan Saman, which was giving 12,000 rupees per hectare for each of the families that owned land, and the vote, the rural vote was swept at that time. So along with that, there have been a whole load of regimes drawing from these four dominant paradigms in which the rural agricultural India is integrated very adversely into the urban and the industrial. I say this adversely because the extraction of resources, of labor, and even rural capital is at the great cost to the average farmer and to rural India. So this is what the dominant imaginary has been, and a dominant paradigm. The result of all this has been, as Leo and others have worked on and know, has been devastating ecologically. Extant vast tracts of rural India are now ecologically degraded, groundwater is in critical conditions, soil, water, biodiversity loss has been huge, very tremendous. In fact, in the world mapping of bioresource loss, India itself has reached the critical levels. So devastating has been the ecological degradation. Along with this is the fact that these four paradigms neglect the landless laborers and the small and marginal farmers who form the majority of the population. In fact, 86% of all holders of rural India, the holdings are of small and marginal farmers, and the average size is only 1.15 hectares, which many of us refer to as handkerchief size, which is not viable, economically viable at all, to be cultivated to give adequate annual income to any family at all. So these are really the problems that we're seeing recur again and again and manifested by suicide, seen as agrarian crisis or distress, but really summarizing what the dominant system has done to rural India. So in that context, Leo's challenge has been, how would you reimagine, what would you do to have ecologically secure, but I would say ecologically sustainable, but socially just and economically stable villages or farming households. One is, first of all, to inverse this dominant image, is to see rural India as having very high potential, draw on its very sophisticated knowledge systems. Somebody in the morning talked about Albert Howard, why the pioneer of the natural farming systems as a British colonial officer spoke so highly about India's rich knowledge, agrarian systems itself. To go back to that and then link it to the second one, which is the Lewisian paradigm, to say that transiting to urban industrial is not inevitable. In fact, all the degrowth, all the new kinds of theories in the West, people who are questioning dominant capitalist paradigms are saying that we know for sure that the urban industrial systems or areas don't have the capacity to house these large numbers of populations which would be forced to migrate out, which you're seeing happening especially in Africa now. So in that context, the alternative imaginary is to then, if you must cater to rural, the landless and small marginal farmers who are the majority, and you need to address widespread ecological degradation, which includes now climate change, which is now one of the biggest factors that is adversely impacting both production and all kinds of standards, not just standards, livability itself, which is very huge amounts of health issues, which are not only COVID, but after COVID we are seeing with increasing temperatures, all kinds of epidemics that have been spread in the rural areas. So if to address all these issues, the new imaginary is to bring together landless laborers who can bring in labor as their resource. Very often in the paradigms, even in arguing for cooperative or group farming, labor is not factored in at all. So if people can come into group farming with less than 1 acre, 1 hectare, can be pooled to form production units along with landless laborers, because landless workers are the ones who are actually running the agrarian systems. It is they who bring the knowledge and the labor into the systems. So if they can come together and form these units of production, in which instead of subsidies, which are very, very problematic, for example, the new direct bank transfer systems go only to those who have titles, to big farmers. And I was just talking to Professor Reddy, and he spoke about how in Telangana it's only big farmers who've mopped up huge amounts of funds. If the funds must go to these small and rural farmers, it can go for 3 things. One is where there is conservation of land, of soil, water, seeds, biodiversity. So you actually pay them for doing ecosystem services, which would also address the ecological question. Secondly, it would address the socio-economic dimension, because most marginal and small farmers and the landless laborers do come from the working class and the laboring class groups as such. That would be it. All the incentivizing production which is sustainable rather than productivity for the market, which would be to address India's biggest problem. As they say, the green revolution's success has become counterproductive to India, because we have huge amounts of wheat and rice stacked up, but not enough buying power by the working class to actually consume this product. So where crop planning, decentralized crop planning, would make sure that only appropriate crops are grown in the ecologically sensitive areas or ecologically appropriate areas, would bring about or question the whole productivity paradigm. So along with this, what you would see is that all the, addressing climate change, again in the morning it was talked about carbon fixing, etc. All of this could be done in these units. And it would be a way in which not only the rural is seen, not only as a site of agricultural production, but also processing and value addition. Much of what we consume here now in urban India, much of the processing, whether it's rice to anything, the ultimate chips packet you have, is done in the urban areas. In fact, processing value addition can actually move to rural areas and to what I call semi-urban areas, and that would also take the pressure off the urban areas. So with this, I want to say that the new imaginary really needs to invert what we have as the dominant system, to look at not only ecological sustainability, but also social justice and economic stability over the long run. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vasavi, for continuing what I believe is a voice of hope, which began with the very first speaker, and for offering us some of the new ways, and some of these new ways are actually old ways. I was in fact going to thinking while you spoke that, we had the visions of collectivization and so on much earlier, but of course that was a different moment. But now you're sort of saying that it can be brought back. Thank you so much for those thoughts. We'll move directly to Joe Athialy of the Center for Financial Accountability, who is going to who has worked with various movements across India, the Narmada Bachao Andolan, the National Association of People's Movements, and will be talking about transforming the world of finance.
Since it's very easy, I'm not going to kind of take much time. While I don't have any answer on what can transform the economy and finance, I want to share why economy needs a serious and radical transformation. Or an understanding of where we stand today is fundamental to thinking about what needs to be changed. It's an understatement to say that our economy is in shambles now. The credit goes back to the plans and programs we followed based on the neoliberal economic policies, but then taken to an all-time low by this government, where cronyism, corruption, fraud, and vulgar accumulation of wealth are legally sanctioned, valorized, and made it into a virtue in itself. Where has that led us to? Look at the economic indicators today. The unemployment rate is highest in 45 years. The GDP growth has been on a downward slide before 2019 with COVID-19, and with the national lockdown, that slide turned into a fall, sending India into a negative growth for the first time in 40 years. Retail inflation rates are still high, impacting the food and essential goods of common people. We can look at the rising household debt, wealth inequality, rampant accumulation of wealth and power, jobless growth, and the crisis of livelihoods. And all this will tell us about the economic state in which we are. Demonetization and the goods and services tax regime has broken the backbone of the informal sector, which employs nearly 90% of the workforce, and small traders, something which they never recovered from. The GST regime has also crippled the state governments in terms of their agility to find resources of their own to meet their needs, posing a serious threat to fiscal federalism. What does wealth inequality to tell us? Dr. Mohan Rao has already said about it. I'm not going to kind of repeat it. But in the process of remaking so many billionaires, in the global hunger index, the country slipped down to 107 out of 121 countries. This is in addition to the crackdown on the civil society, criminalizing dissent, engineering communal polarization in a massive and planned manner, or the compromising of all key institutions in this country which could have and which played a role in the past to speak truth to the powers and hold them accountable. All of these are essential to this regime to promote and sustain the dream of Amritkal. While a Bofors robbed a government decades back, a Rafale jet deal or electoral bonds or PM cares or even a Hindenburg report is not even looked at with the seriousness it deserves and not pursued to the logical end by the media or judiciary. And the voices of opposition parties are either expunged or they are disqualified. The secrecy which is made to accept and silence board over these matters with ED and IT rates has further exacerbated the gap of accountability. Look at our banks and other financial institutions. Saddled by huge non-performing assets, the government had to resort to two things to make them look better. Massive write-offs of bad loans amounting to over 11 trillion rupees in the past 6 years were one of them. The majority of these bad loans belong to big corporations and not students, farmers, or small traders, all of whom are harassed by recovery agents and many driven to take their lives. The other thing the government did to ensure that the banks maintain a required capital was to recapitalize the banks. Government recapitalized the banks with over 3 trillion rupees of taxpayers' money in the past 5 fiscals. Not only that bank lost common people's money in the bad loans, the government used taxpayers' money to recapitalize the banks, making it a double whammy for common people. While political interference and cronyism are key reasons for these massive bad loans, one of the other reasons is the lack of due diligence process independently by the banks, including looking at the social and environmental risks. But currently, they rely on the environmental clearance or forest clearance of the government. Government, in the meanwhile, removed the Parivesh website, which shared information about the environmental impact of projects. Apart from the traditional investors, the new breed of investors are the sovereign wealth funds, private equity funds, and the venture capital funds. A study done last year by our team reveals that just the sovereign wealth funds, real estate investment trusts, and private equity funds alone invested $146 billion between 2016 and 2020 in sectors like oil and gas, renewable energy projects, real estate, and large infrastructure projects, all of which are outside the purview of any regulatory mechanism to bring into some accountability in them. There are Indian private equity and venture capital investors, though in comparison to their foreign counterparts, they are small. A question which is asked to us often is, why should private investments come under public scrutiny? We believe that without three components, private entities can never make massive profits: tax subsidies, tax holidays, and tax waivers, all of which could have been used for the welfare of the citizens. Two, land and other resources at a very low price, if not for free. And finally, the public financial institutions largely bear the cost and take the risk of their businesses. Well, there is some focus on Indian commercial banks, however inadequate it is. What's done by the Indian Exim Bank using taxpayers' money in other countries is seldom reported or discussed. Until 2019, it invested over $24 billion in Asia and Africa, fueling land grabbing, massive promotion of agribusiness in energy projects and other large infrastructure projects. The impacts of these investments on people, climate, forest, and water bodies are rarely reported or debated in the country. Privatization of public services and institutions is at an all-time high. Institutions built decades back using public money were allowed to die slowly by the policymakers. Take the example of the state-owned BSNL. They were never allowed to bid for the 4G when it was introduced, saying that the private parties will not have a level playing ground. The situation remains the same even now with 5G. And then we all crib about the poor services of the state-owned company and switch to the private players. Or look at the public sector banks. In the State Bank of India, while VRS is encouraged, no recruitment is done for the past few years. That per employee customers in SBI is 1,900, while in HDFC it is only 501, ICICI 353, and Axis Bank 325. How can we expect a better service in SBI in comparison to its private counterparts? And poor service is often cited as a reason why SBI should be privatized. I'm skipping the part of the World Bank and IMF, G20 and its Financial Stability Board, all of which is kind of behind the designs for countries like India. Thank you so much. India, being the presidency of the G20 this year, is not leaving any stones unturned, no walls unpainted, and no hoardings left without the photos of the Vishwaguru to make it a grand political spectacle using taxpayers' money, is unashamedly evicting slums, removing thousands of street vendors and waste pickers from cities wherever G20 events are happening for security and beautification process. While it looks daunting, the collective efforts of people have resulted in some changes in the past. 30 years back, when principles of accountability were at an early stage, the struggle in the Narmada Valley forced the World Bank out of Sadasava project, and the accountability mechanism inspection panel was instituted. Many in the audience have been a part of the struggle for decades. A people's campaign in 2018 forced the government to withdraw the financial resolution and depositors insurance bill, one of the three bills this government was forced to kind of withdraw. The bill would have made the depositors' money to bail a bank out in case of its collapse. A bunch of fisher people from Kutch successfully challenged World Bank's immunity in US Supreme Court, allowing communities around the world to legally challenge the World Bank group in any court. Finally, any engagement with government to transform the economy or financial institutions requires a democratic space. At a time when that is missing, fighting for economic transformation requires fighting for a democratic space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe Athialy, for those stark reminders of the path we are traveling, not just in India but worldwide, from what you told us. But of course, our struggle is particularly acute. And thank you also for ending on a slightly more optimistic note and giving us some clues as to what kinds of victories, however small they are, have been won through the national movements that you have been a part of. We'll move straight on to the next speaker, who is Dunu Roy. That's his dark name. He has a long name, which actually I don't know unless I look into my phone. So I'm going to skip that. But we all know him as Dunu, and he's been an activist. He's trained as a chemical engineer, but has been an activist in Delhi for a very long time. And will tell us perhaps, is part of what's called the Hazard Center. And he is going to talk about imagining inclusive politics. Dunu.
No, that's a deep secret. You just have to imagine it. Yeah? Thank you, ESG, for allowing me to be part of this celebration. I also think it's time for a bit of reflection along with celebration. So I'll try and do that with your permission. The theme that has been given to me is imagining inclusive politics. Now, we live in a time where the imagined becomes real and the real becomes imagined. I thought the Mughals were there at one time. Now I'm told it's all imaginary. Fortunately, Tipu Sultan has survived because apparently some Vokaligers killed him some time ago. So they killed him. So Tipu Sultan survives. So he's still part of our reality. So this business of imagined and real, I think, is a trap. And it's a trap because something that was real at one time suddenly becomes imagined at another time. And there is this passage of time which we need to take into account. Professor Jasanoff implied that there were certain universal principles according to which an imagined politics could be constructed. I am not too sure. Perhaps there are not universal principles. Perhaps there are universal contradictions, and we need to address those. There are conflicts which we need to recognize as part of reality. So let me put to you 3 themes, and I'm purposely doing this because I'm also trying to address several of the issues that came up yesterday and in the panel discussion today morning. This is a very disappointing panel because there are no PowerPoints, So you only have to look at us, and we are not very powerful points. But let me try and put 3 themes, and please imagine them. Okay? The first theme is a politics which is self-corrective. Now, this is a politics that was adopted. Now, again, we don't know whether it's imagined or real. But apparently, we are celebrating Amrit Kal, so it must have been real. 75 years ago, something happened, and that what happened was a moment when a certain self-corrective politics was put in place. What is this self-corrective politics? It is based on principles of liberty, fraternity, equality. And the Constitution is based on it. Unfortunately, the Constitution is also a pretty contradictory document. It's not all that clear on many issues. But at least it recognizes the individual liberty, the individual's right to equality, and the individual's right to fraternity. And much of our jurisprudence is based on that. And what Justice Yadav was saying today was that there is a system, and we have to learn the rules of the game. Now, this is precisely the point, that the rules of the game were self-corrective. which is that you propose a particular jurisprudence, it may not work, then you propose another one to correct it, like the Forest Rights Act, for instance. It's a corrective act. The Environment Protection Act, the Water Pollution Act, the Air Pollution Act, these are all corrective acts. Something happens, the Bhopal accident happens, so corrective jurisprudence comes into place. But sometime in the night, and I should add that this self-corrective politics is possibly what made the work of ESG possible. That you could explore those niches of self-correction and say, do something about Narmada, do something about the poor karmikas, do something about the Mysore infrastructure corridor, and so on. But I think what may have escaped your notice, so I'm bringing it back to your attention, is that sometime in the mid-90s, this self-corrective politics was replaced by a protective mentality politics. What is it? Suddenly, it was not the individual who was at liberty. It was the market which was free. It was not the individual who could claim equality. It was the market which claimed equity. And please notice the difference between these two words, equality and equity. Equity is a market share language. It is not equality. And fraternity, which was there for individual communities, started becoming global market fraternity. So there is a change, and therefore there is a change in the rules of the game, which we don't seem to have recognized. So what do we do? And this is the problem, that we are harking, many of us are harking back and saying, let's go back to the self-protective politics. Let's resurrect that. That's democracy. This is not democracy. I'm only urging that there's possibly a third way of looking at it. And that third way of looking at it is reject the rules of the game. Why are we playing this game at all? Who made the rules? We didn't make it. And if we didn't make it, it's obviously not for us. So this is the new challenge. It's not a very new challenge, actually a very old challenge. And I'll end with the story from the Chhattisgarh mines Shramik Sangh, way back in the 1970s. They were fighting for the livelihoods of 8,000 manual workers. And the mines were privatizing and mechanizing. And these 8,000 workers would have lost their jobs. What the union proposed was semi-mechanization. They changed the rules of the game. So they gave us the brief saying, prove that semi-mechanization is more valid. We could not prove it on economic data. But we proved it on environmental data. We said that mechanization will cause huge environmental problems, which manual will not. And that's how the union won the battle on semi-mechanization. So I think there's a lot of history that we have of how organizations have fought to change the rules of the game in their favor, not accept the system, not accept this jurisprudence. And I would state that not accepting these rules of the game means you have to construct new rules of the game, new politics, new sciences, and new technologies. You cannot use the old. New thinking has to come in. There are many examples of it. Sorry, there's no time, so I can't tell you about them. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dunu, for giving us those very hopeful thoughts. It's very easy for a panel like this to slip into a certain kind of nostalgia. Remember another time when things were, used to work, perhaps looking back much more favorably than they do now. But we have now been told to exactly use those tactics, if you like, to be able to combat what we are facing today. Thank you so much. We'll move straight on to Prem Chandavarkar. Again, somebody who needs no introduction in a city like Bangalore, has long been an architect and is a member of Chandavarkar and Thacker, the renowned architecture firm, but has also been head of the Srishti Manipal Institute for Design, and will be speaking to us on environmental limits to human endeavors. Prem? If I can just take a second. It's Anubrato Kumar. That's his long name.
I started working on this topic. I was assigned environmental limits to human endeavors, and then found myself compelled to reverse the title, Human Limits to Environmental Endeavors. We've known about environmental limits since a long time, and an understanding best captured to me by the economist Kenneth Boulding in his classic paper of 1966, The Economics of the Coming Spaceship Earth, where he describes two possible kinds of economics. The first he calls cowboy economics, recalling the appropriation of the Americas by European settlers who assumed an infinite terrain of ever-expanding frontiers available for appropriation. And this is the dominant paradigm. The second is spaceship economics, that assumes a space so finite that every action must account for its impact on fellow inhabitants. Boulding argues that cowboy economics posits an open system where the priority is on expanding throughput and choice can be individualized. Spaceship economics accepts a closed system where the priority has to be sustaining the quality and quantity of stock within the system, and choice has to be collectivized in some form. The profound challenge we face is that we have a political system in which the legitimacy of governance rests on assuring an open system of continuous economic growth, combined with an interpretation of constitutional rights that foregrounds the individualization of choice. So we need a persuasive strategy that provokes systemic reform and lifestyle change, which brings us to the human limits. And persuasion is a challenge because nature is complex, and I use the word in a very specific sense, inspired by another classic paper, this one from the 1940s, Warren Weaver's Science and Complexity, in which he posits three categories of scientific problems. The first he calls organized simplicity, where the entire system can be captured in a conceptual model of scientific law. The second is disorganized complexity, where the system is so disaggregated that understanding is possible only through statistical techniques. The third is organized complexity, where organization in the system does not directly ensue from a priori scientific law, but emerges over time through interaction of the parts of the system with each other and with context. This occurs because the system possesses a capacity for emergence of order through iterative evolutionary spirals of experiential pattern recognition. Living systems, in other words, nature, tend to be characterized by organized complexity. This makes nature a nonlinear system, which means there are no determined chains of cause and effect, for emergence in its experiential discovery of pattern can divert down unforeseen paths. There is no direct correspondence between input and output. Large inputs can result in insignificant output, and small inputs, especially when they exponentially coalesce, can cause system-changing output. Therefore, and this is the core part of the human limits, rational argument to incentivize large change is hugely challenging, for you cannot offer anyone an assurance that an action towards lifestyle change will result in a specific benefit within a predictable period of time. We must accept nature as a complex, nonlinear system of which we are a part, realizing our cause has limits if hope rests solely on a communicative rationality that builds consensus on public interest, and adopt an ethics and language of organized complexity. To this end, I offer 5 propositions. Many of these are thoughts borrowed from others, but time places limits on offering detailed citations. I'd be happy to share them in subsequent conversation. Number one, the strategic logic of organized complexity and emergence is not new to us. We are not schooled in the way of emergence, but perhaps because we are not schooled that way, we forget that it is the way we intuitively live. Our social relationships, our culture, are products of emergence. Emergence is the only way ideas go viral, and urgency demands virality. We must seek to inclusively institutionalize the connections, feedback loops, pattern recognition, and network logic that catalyze emergence. Number two, we must discard modernity's assumption of a disenchanted world in which we are the only sentient beings. The sentience of nature is revealed in a recalcitrance that becomes evident in larger timescales, and the visibility of this has been exponentially increasing in recent times. We must discard the detached ego-based consciousness we are schooled in and reschool ourselves in a participating consciousness that is moved by the magic of the world it is embedded in. Number three, nature is not a purely scientific fact out there, it is actively shaped by our inner imagination. We tend to equate it with wilderness and therefore construe its presence in the city as an aesthetic spectacle we may enjoy rather than an ecological presence we must respect. We must recognize that the shrub we plant in our garden and the weed that spouts in a pavement crack are worthy of the same wonder we grant to a primal forest. Number four, we must move beyond the language of rational persuasion and adopt the language of joy. A message of science, statistics, and moral exhortation, while true, is weighty and demobilizing. Joy is light, energizing, and anchored in something larger than ourselves. And we must embark on a mission to sensitize people to the joy they may discover in how their environment echoes the miracle of their own consciousness. Number five, joy demands the language of poetry. If we feel that poetry is intimate, subjective, and distanced from politics, we have not learned the lesson available in our history, the role Mahatma Gandhi played in India's freedom movement. Gandhi is recognized for his ethics and politics, but sadly insufficiently recognized for his poetics. One of his major contributions to the movement was his ability to translate the spirit of Swaraj into poetic metaphors such as spinning wheels and salt. This made the message more accessible, lent unity to a diverse set of struggles, and empowered embodied participation by a multitude. I do not need to speak on environmental limits to this audience. As friends of ESG, you are the converted, already warriors to the cause. While we must persist with rational persuasion on environmental limits, especially to those possessing influence, I end offering the humble suggestion that we also recognize human limits to environmental endeavors and embrace complexity and emergence. Thank you.
Thank you once more for laying out a prescription of sorts, and not just for analyzing the problems that we are facing. Thank you very much for that. We'll have time to come back to these questions during the discussion, I hope. I move straight on to Dr. Satyajit Mayor, until recently the director of the National Center for Biological Sciences, but continues to be at the National Center, and who will talk to us about academia and transformations to sustainability.
Well, thank you, Janaki, and also Leo for inviting me to come and speak on this occasion of the 25th year of ESG. I mean, that in itself is a remarkable achievement, and and being at the other end, which is at the academic end, I can only salute the energy, the real commitment that you've had for this whole idea of sustainability in a very difficult time. And I hope the next 25 years the next 25 years is something that one hopes will bring some change to the assault that we are seeing on the planet, and the ability for as Prem was mentioning, an enchanted view of the systems that we live in, instead of a sort of anthropocentric perspective. But the topic that you had asked me to speak about, academia and the transformation of sustainability, I mean that's a huge task. And so I just wanted to make a few points, and perhaps some things will come up in discussion. So a couple of things that I wanted to first of all sort of deconstruct for myself is, what does one mean by when one says academia and the transformation of sustainability? So one thinks about academia as education and educators, research and researchers, and of course people who apply the fruits of both, which is the fruits of education and research. That is, people who use it and apply it for both transformation positively and for extraction. And I think in all these domains, academia, which is this whole collective, is in the business of making the so-called experts, and it is, in fact, I feel the real the problem here, that these experts are pronouncing various judgments about, and also various diktats on what should happen. And in fact, the tyranny of experts, I feel, generated through our academic systems, is something that I feel must change if we are going to think about sustainability on this planet. Experts, and I think, I was speaking to Bhargavi, and I think she mentioned, Sheila had also said this yesterday, that experience versus expertise. And I think the solution of how academia and the transformation of sustainability can be construed is if one thinks about expertise with experience. And this is something I feel we must bring into our academic institutions. Think about how an interdisciplinary thinking with respect to experience builds people and people's imagination in thinking about how one can think about how one can bring about solutions. I mean, one can just list a number of catastrophes that have happened because of the so-called expertise. In fact, the Narmada Bachao Andolan was a consequence of experts coming together to bring in the expertise of the local people around the Narmada. And in fact, some of my friends and colleagues that I was at college with were part of this movement as well, and they listened very deeply to the people who had experience of what was the transformations that could happen. However, if you look at today, we are seeing a second. We've seen many, but we're seeing one more catastrophe, and that is the whole extractive system of creating palm oil plantations in the Nicobar Islands. I mean, I cannot imagine a destructive program of this nature that is happening under our eyes with all these experts of different stripes sitting in the room. Of course, somebody must have made these decisions for the palm oil plantations to have gone ahead as a major program of this government to literally plunder the incredible richness and diversity that exists in the Nicobar Islands today. So, I mean, in the next 25 years, we're not going to see any of that if these plantations proceed. So then how does one begin to connect and create systems where one can also begin to transform the academia? And I can talk from some experience that from some things that we have been doing in our own institution, which was the National Center for Biological Science. We have tried in many ways to build a fora for thinking and engaging in conversations about Bangalore's sustainability, and working with the Azim Premji Foundation, working with APU, Biome, NCF, and many such organizations, and including with ESG, to create a forum that we call the Bangalore Sustainability Forum, where we want to bring in people who are working on the ground, people who are working at the grassroots level, people who are working in sort of perhaps in silos, to bring about at least a dialogue amongst different organizations, including the government stakeholders, to begin to consider, what does sustainability mean in the context of the air, water, biodiversity, and most importantly and more pressingly, climate resilience of a city like ours. And this is where I think research organizations can bring in the so-called experts, but they will be able to listen to people who have experience and create sort of structures that can perhaps inform what sustainability might be about. And I'll end by saying that I think transformation also specifically in sustainability must be thought through when one is creating programs for educating the next generation. I mean, the next generation is, in fact, going to be at the receiving end of everything that's unsustainable. And if I feel one doesn't equip the next generation with thinking about also the reality of today, which is not necessarily that of the world, considering climate change and its mitigation as a priority. In fact, it seems to be the very opposite. But how does one equip younger people to have a sense of what can make a difference? And here, I think transformative programs that can bring an understanding of how biological systems work, how biological systems have a sense of their own sustainable existence. That's something which I feel could bring in a new dimension into thinking about how academia can tie this together. And I'd be happy to discuss this specific aspect in any conversation later. But thank you for giving me this opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you once more for outlining yet another register on which certain forms of interdisciplinarity can perhaps challenge the tyranny of experts. But I just want to throw into this discussion, and perhaps we can take it up when we have the more general discussion, that what we are witnessing today is also a capacity for people, for the political establishment, to actually ignore the expert. Even though the expert is called in to provide the kind of legitimacy that governments need. We've seen this most recently in the case of the Western Ghats, I think, and we will continue to see such examples later as well. So, that's something we need to also perhaps put our minds to. I would like to call on Asma Naseer, who's the editor of the Salar Times, who's going to talk to us about a very important subject of expressing freedoms fearlessly from the perspective of someone who has long worked in the world of print journalism.
Good afternoon, everybody. The topic that I have been given is expressing freedoms fearlessly. But before that, I think I'd want to congratulate Leo and Bhargavi and ESG. Seriously, I mean, I know Leo for the last 40 years now. We've been childhood friends, and Sudha is here. And I think Margaret is missing, but who would have thought? So it is my privilege, and I feel so proud to be here, so proud of the work ESG is doing, and so proud to be associated with all of you. In gatherings like this, when we talk about expressing freedoms, I mean, somehow, always we end up with this topic. It's almost become cliched that when we have a gathering of people, that we should talk about how difficult it has become for us to express freedoms. And at the same time, it is so sad, because this is something that we should have sorted out at least a couple of centuries ago. I mean, in the 18th century, maybe we should have told, okay, freedoms, non-negotiable. Expressing them fearlessly, non-negotiable. We have done this, we have done and dusted, now we move on. But today when we talk about it, generally we hear people saying that there's too much freedom. And this too much freedom has become detrimental to our values. It has led to indiscipline. It is some kind of a precursor to all the chaos that is happening. And when we look at it, it also sounds perfectly reasonable. Because this is what we have been taught as children. Don't ask questions. Respect authority. Adults know better. Teachers know better. And of course, parents know better. The boss knows better. Then why shouldn't the state not know better? So when we talk about expressing freedoms, what we're actually doing is putting ourselves against everything that we have been indoctrinated into, what we have been taught. And believe me, that is not an easy place to be. So when we're talking about expressing freedoms, we're not just talking about the media, though I know I've been invited here as a media person, but expressing freedoms has somehow become a way of challenging every kind of authority. You don't want to study something, you want to study something else. You want to hold this job and not that job. You don't want to go to church or temple or mosque, wherever you don't want to go to. You want to marry the person you love. In every situation, you're actually challenging the established norm. Very early in life, I remember reading that the personal is political. Today, the political has become very, very personal. We're being told what to eat, what to wear, where to go, who to go with, where to live, where not to live, where you will not be allowed to live, who to love, who to marry. In fact, politicians are even telling us how many children we should have so that we can uphold the glory of this nation. And should you cross that undefined line, and that line is very undefined, because nobody knows, when we are going to cross that line. I mean, just look at last year around this time. The hijab was one of the biggest issues in this country. And today, after about 70,000 girls have dropped out of schools and colleges, our politicians are telling us that in this election, hijab is a non-issue. This undefinable line changes, according to the time of day, the month we are in, what the season is, what election is coming, who is fighting, what is at stake. And should we cross this undefinable line, whether by intent or just accidentally, then what you're doing is not just putting your job, your security, your comfort, but sometimes your lives and the lives of your dear ones in danger. And today things have come to such a pass that merely existing, breathing, speaking, seeing, hearing is seen as an affront to the state. I think it was Mussolini, long ago I remember reading this, and this one sentence stuck with me. The state is everything. And without the state, we don't have a place to exist. And today anybody will tell us that when we express our freedoms, it is not a safe, comfortable, or even a desirable place to be. Yet, on the other hand, today there is a crying need to express freedoms, because it is precisely when our freedoms become unsafe, because when expressing freedoms becomes unsafe or uncomfortable, it is also most required. In situations where being free, speaking your mind, or saying what you believe in becomes reasons for incarceration or even the gallows, it is exactly at this point that you need to speak freely and fearlessly. Because when you express your freedoms, whether personal or political, you're actually reclaiming a part of yourselves. So that brings us to the question that I have been given. Can we express freedoms fearlessly? My answer is yes. And this is not because we are brave. It's not because we want to take on authority. It is not because we want to be heroes. It is simply because there is no choice. The opposite of being free, okay, I'll finish. The opposite of being free, as all of us know, is slavery. And Shakespeare long ago asked us, is there anyone here who would rather be a slave? Julius Caesar. So today we need to push with whatever we have to safeguard our freedoms, if necessary, with our lives. And when we do that, oftentimes we find that we are not alone. Because this desire for freedom is innate in all human beings. And no matter what the cost, we as a species have always attained that freedom. Right at the beginning I said, when we talk about freedoms, it is not an easy place to be. But is it a worthwhile place? Yes, it is. And I will end by quoting Faiz. I'm a big, you can say I'm a Faiz Bhakt. A beautiful line from Faiz that I fall back on very often, which says, Lambi hai gam ki sham, magar sham hi to hai. It is a long night, but it is just a night. Thank you.
I must thank you again, Asma, for those words of hope, especially the words on which you ended. And we will take this forward and to a conclusion with the little talk by Anand Yagnik, who is an advocate. And he is going to talk to us about making justice central to decision making. Anand?
You can't hold this discourse in Ahmedabad, Leo, because thank you, Leo and Environment Support Group, to invite me all the way from Gujarat, Ahmedabad. Unfortunately, I know Narendra Bhai and Amit Bhai. We call them Fafada and Jalebi. I know Tushar Mehta, the Solicitor General, who has established vulture jurisprudence, because we all are vultures from the days of Corona, and crores of laborers who are migrating in search of their parent town. I know Bimal Patel, who is constructing the 9th Delhi, because from maternal side, he happens to be my cousin brother. However, we call him the architect of a Hitler. You know, Leo, leave aside this subject. I am a misfit screw as far as this panel is concerned, because I am a lawyer, was never interested in academics. I am a man of action and reaction. Must have filed more than 278 public, social, and environment interest litigations, together with my commercial practice. Gandhi Ashram is now owned by the government of Gujarat. Vidyapith is now run by our governor, Acharya Devrat. Gandhi Mandir, established in Gandhinagar, is only meant for Justice Gogai, the greatest judge that we have ever come across. And Niti Ayog's, those barking human beings who run the country. These are not the places now meant for us. And IIMs and INIDs, Athiras, Joy knows, have become subservient to the political dispensation of the day, because their autonomy was taken away by the legislation of 2018. So when we wanted to hold a meeting in support of farmers, when they were opposing the legislation, not a single institution provided us with their premises. When we wanted to support Kagaj Nahi Batayenge movement, CAA NRC, Would you believe the High Court of Gujarat in 17 litigations thought that this is not the time to hold a public meeting, in spite of the fact that the greatest judgment rendered by a constitution bench of Supreme Court way back in 72 on the freedom of expression is with respect to a rule that was challenged, constituted or rather framed by a police commissioner of Ahmedabad, denying public meeting and processions. One must know that since 75, we do not have regulations regulating public meeting and processions, and therefore the enabling provision of Section 33 of the Bombay Police Act cannot be enforced. Those of you who know the law also knows very properly that in order to implement the legislation, you have to have rules, because rules provide the expansion of the area left behind by the legislature to the discretion and the wisdom of the executive. We don't have that rules. Now, leave aside all these things. I'm too happy, and I would love to invite Infosys and Azim Premji in Gujarat to have such auditorium so that we can discuss how greatly we are denied the freedom of expressions. Because I heard the ex-mayor discussing about Marxism. Gentlemen, you are a Naxalite. You have recently killed a policeman 2 days ago. So you must be behind the bar. This is what Gujarat model is about. 5 instances. I know I have a limited time. I'm looking at you. When I look at her and the rules framed by her, I'm always reminded by the judge who left us and the judges who always scold upon us. Mr. Yagnik, in nutshell, what is the matter? ये philosophy सुनने के लिए इधर हम नहीं आते. You must have come across a news that in Kutch and Devbhoomi Dwarka district, many fishermen's houses have been demolished in Gujarat. These are predominantly Muslim fishermen who have been residing on the sea coast from Jakhau to Dwarka, from Dwarka to Porbandar, the birthplace of Mahatma Gandhi. We have about 400 fishermen villages. Our national security advisor, for reasons best known to him, visited the coastal area. Mr. Adani's port only had 20,000 kilos of heroin, and he was not even questioned. They decided, after the visit of National Security Advisor, that all those Muslim villages on the sea coast of Gujarat, starting from Jakhau to Mundra to Devbhoomi Dwarka, Porbandar, and so forth, are a national security threat because they are Muslims. They don't say they are Muslims, but they want to say that. They are illegal because they have established themselves on a government land. Those of you who know coastal regulation zone notification know that certain portions is owned by the government of India, but beyond that, I have started, so I will end up, don't worry. And the remaining portion belongs to the state. This civilization of fishermen is there for last more than 200 to 400 years. Britishers have accounted for it, Portuguese have accounted for it. However, what has happened is that village, as it is divided into 2 parts, residential and cultivable land, they are not part of the residential land. However, they have been residing there on the government land, but they are encroacher because they don't own the land. In 70s and 80s started the movement of extending the Gramatar, that is residential area of the village. And with a clear-cut observation that the fishermen are integral part of the civilization. Thank you very much for accepting this by the state. By virtue of their profession, they have to be on the sea. They are supposed to fish. They are scattered, they stay in the hutments, they are not part of the regular civilization. However, it is now obligation on our part because we are also inviting them for election and the voting. This is what is stated in the document of the state. So let us integrate them into residential land of a village, have them part of it, us. That movement remained on the paper, did not happen. So we have predominantly Muslims and Hindu villages across the coastal area. What has happened is that two things happened. 93, the Bombay blast, you know. The RDX passed from coastal Gujarat. Not a single Muslim assisted the passage of it and participated in any manner whatsoever. Then 26/11. Not a single Muslim participated in the same. We have a drug problem now. 60%, in every 6th or 7th young person, including in the National Law University of Gujarat and all colleges, they take drugs. And whenever I am depressed by virtue of losing some important matter because of contribution of judiciary as a state and not as a institution of justice, my juniors who have studied in such a good institution tell me, "Ghas poos chahiye, ठिकाने आ जाएगा दिमाग." So they are not enemy of the state, but the Muslims are, because they may participate in drugs, they may participate in ISI, with ISI, they may participate in that, and therefore they have to be removed. Just as Mathura's temple has the mosque of Mathura has a shivling, these Muslim fishermen will establish themselves in the Devasthan called Dwarika and the adjoining area. We must resist now because we are in a state where Hindutva also is an integral to Article 14. Leo, you must understand, Hindus and Muslims must have equal right of Article 14. So far, Hindus have been discriminated against. And therefore, now is a state where Article 14 must come into operation, and bulldozer jurisprudence is an integral to Article 14. Now is only the state which is equal, because Hindus are now respected. If you don't, go to Pakistan. These settlements were not regularized. We have 4 Muslim villages, we have 2 Hindu villages. Now the fishing activity is divided into religion in a Gujarat model, which is a known activity. So we are not surprised by the same. And let me tell you, Leo, when we have a problem in Gujarat, Anand Yagnik doesn't go to collector and the IG police. I go to RSS office and seek their assistance. Vandana ji, who is almost my mentor, must understand that law does not run from the constitution or the barrel of the gun. Law runs from the office premises of RSS. So in order to seek assistance for a rehabilitation and resettlement, we are visiting the RSS office now. So all these discussions beyond a point are meaningless. We have been approaching Gujarat High Court. I will end up in 2 minutes, don't worry. I'm not going to take up Nirma, Adani, SEZ, Reliance, and so forth. I prepared a lot, but time is a constraint. Because they are all the pillars of Gujarat model, and we need to understand, in order to understand what Fafda and Jalebi are going to do in Karnataka, Kerala, and Tamil Nadu. These settlements, in spite of 3 litigations, were not regularized. They were ready and willing to pay price. These settlements have price of the land. These settlements have Pradhan Mantri toilets for Swachhata. These settlements have Anganwadi to strengthen our children who are deprived for 60 years of basic nutrition immediately after they take birth. It is only now, since 2014, that the children of India are getting nutrition. Now they are going to get millet. This is a Amrut Kal, a millet year. So we have Angadwadis, we have primary schools, we have all Pradhan Mantri yojanas implemented in this illegal settlement, sir. We also have temples, we have Pujari's house, we have many other Hindu house. So you have a public distribution system, you have schools, you have Angadwadis, you have Pradhan Mantri toilets, and everything. in spite of the fact that in the High Court, Advocate General gives an assurance that we will undertake rehabilitation and resettlement, we know that these people are absolutely without any history sheet in the police station. And therefore, since they have given an undertaking that if our presence, leave aside our religion, is required for us to get out of the coastal area and to ensure security of the state, we shall get out. We are so obliged, is what Advocate General states in the High Court, and that we said certainly to undertake given the policies that we have at present. Within days of this assurance, Jakhau goes, a couple of villages of Devbhumi Dwarka are demolished. Many Hindu temples and places where Hindus reside are kept completely untouched, even in those villages, and they are standing on government land. Hindu fishermen villages are completely untouched because they are not security threat to the nation. For demolition, the deployment of 1,200 to 1,500 policemen is there. Only 200 JCBs provided by Congress and BJP politicians, Leo. Because majority of the contractors of Adani and Ambani are Congress politicians. So what a great combination that we have, a Gujarat model. Therefore, they must not get even 50, 45 today. They must get 0 so that they will learn a lesson. That's what I believe. Having had, the day I entered in my profession of law, we lost Congress ruled state, and for last more than 27 years, we have a present political dispensation. We know how do we live and what I believe. We are waiting for an FIR and to be arrested. That's all. All these Muslim villages have been demolished. Hindu villages have not been touched. The places constructed by Hindus within these villages are absolutely untouched. Masjids have gone, dargahs have gone, everything has gone. The resolutions of the state of Gujarat, the circulars and the guidelines of rehabilitating them, providing them with the customary rights, providing them with rehabilitated with Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana on the sea coast. Okay? By 2022, all poor men were to be given a housing. Nahi diya. So, after demolition, during Ramzan, after होली, क्योंकि होली हमारी बिगड़नी नहीं चाहिए, रमजान का जो होना है हो जाए. We filed litigations for rehabilitation and resettlement. We are told by the brothers of our great judge who wanted us to be within the four corners of law, and rightly so. Not that this is a sarcastic comment. I respect him. He has given one of the finest judgments. But his brothers are not. We are told that, Mr. Yagnik, this is a public interest litigation. Those poor who have resided in the 50 years can't be paid a premium by rehabilitation and resettlement. They have stayed on the government land for 50 years. What more you can expect? So you must have earned. With your earning, purchase a land elsewhere. This is what the reaction is. What is your right after demolition to claim rehabilitation and resettlement? Forget about the assurances given by the state. They are neither here nor there. So regulations, justice system and everything. This is what the last issue that we have been facing, not to get depressed upon, but to go on and on. Many things to share, but time constraint. Grateful that you have extended, you have stopped that watch. But there are two things that inspire us. One is Mahatma. When he laid the movement for securing equal wages for white workmen of the mines and the non-white. In his first rally, the 11,000 workmen were standing behind him. When he started walking towards those horses with the police and the guns, nobody walked along with him. they took time. And the Gandhiji, when he came back from a Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi to Mahatma Gandhi from South Africa, he narrated this incident to many. And it inspires us by saying that if you want a justice and there is nobody to support you when you look back, that void is a source of inspiration, and therefore keep walking. One. And a very famous statement by Ravichander Tagore, which we say in Gujarati, Tari haq suni jo koi na ave to eklo jane re. When you call for assistance, if nobody turns up, then you walk that lane alone. Thank you very much. Leo, my promise to you, when you want to hold such session, I will be next to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think despite the pessimism and despite distancing yourself from the rest of this panel, it has worked wonderfully. We've had really marvelous ideas thrown up here, very important ones. Some people have already left us. But we do have how much time? About 15 minutes for discussion. So let's have questions here.
Hello. Thank you for this really extraordinary panel. I learned so much. My name is Pariru. I'm a PhD student. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at Harvard University. I thought this panel was fascinating because of its constant interplay of politics and governance and kind of reflecting on the current political moment. I want to ask, I guess, the panel at large and whoever has thoughts on this about the increasing scientization and technologization of governance, and all of you to some degree have spoken about it, the rise of expertise, the rise of technology, the rise of the scientific lens with which to see things like ecological problems, etc., etc. How do you think that quote-unquote progressive vision sits hand in hand with the extremely conservative ideology of the current political party? So how do you think this neutrality of progressivism, modernism is able to coexist with very explicitly conservative right-wing modes of political operation of this party? Some help in understanding this contradiction as it's playing out in politics would be very helpful and interesting.
Can we take 2 or 3 questions? So we'll move directly on, and meanwhile the panelists can think about what they would like to respond.
Hello, my name is Swapna. I'm a dentist by profession. And my question here is more to you, ma'am, Janaki ma'am, that when we are actually facing since 2014, there has been an orchestration of the change of history in its place. From the change of the name of states to like the recent one here proposed in Karnataka is Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences is going to be named as something else. So basically there's a whole change of the facts of the past to whatever or whoever wants it to change. And as the largest democracy, people like me are simply sitting and watching this. And I don't know by the time my children and grandchildren come, what will be the story of the past that will be there for them. So it's a collective thing that I'm asking. So where are we headed, including the last speaker that spoke of? Brazen things happening, but that's the new history that we are all witnessing. So as a history, what is this that we are actually witnessing by being silent?
Can we take at least 2 more questions?
I'm Satya. My name is Satya Prakash Varanashi. And, basically an architect, but doing a couple of other things. Well, I've just added one more sub-question based on what the lady there just now said about technology and science. Yesterday also we discussed about this, what I was always calling as the implication of the expertise, but I heard Satyajit saying tyranny of experts, and it's not good for sustainability. Thank you very much and fully agree with you on that. That is a radically radical statement. Now we know that expertise is an outcome of what we can call a specialization, and there are many other words, but specialization has led to expertise. One common word I picked up from all of you today in this panel is imagination. Now, of course, we all know, and we have been talking new imaginations, and we all know how imagination has contributed to the human society at large across many millennia. Now the second question part, or I can say first question, and I'm basically going to ask Satyajit about this. See, with the artificial intelligence coming in now, and of course it's an outcome of science and technology and many other innovation and many other issues, what implication it may have on this whole idea of imagination? And the idea of imagination, the way it has shaped our society, governance, law, justice, everything can come under this. So there may be a major implication on all these over the coming centuries. And if that's the case, where are we standing by discussing all this now?
We'll take one more question and then we'll request the panelists to respond.
So this is not specific to anyone here, but then collectively, even including ESG. I've been witnessing the kind of discussion that's been happening from yesterday. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. My name is Ferdinand. Currently, we are running a small inclusive learning space. So I'm coming from the background of the consciousness, the awakening of this consciousness as early as possible in schools. So is there anything that we can collectively think of, come up with, and then enter the schools so that we have, like yesterday, the professor was talking about one of the schools being involved in the environmental cleaning up programs and things like that. So I was just loud thinking, and I just wanted to say that to everyone here. So can we look at that, and then what can be done in that direction? Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. So may I request whoever feels able to answer these questions should actually go ahead. I'll come to the one that was addressed to me towards the end.
Yeah. So I think Satya's point and your point was somewhat related. What I didn't fully understand was when you said progressivist. Could you repeat that? You mean the sense that scientific and technological drivers are going to drive modernity and progressive, quote unquote, yeah, and progression, I mean, yeah. Well, I think the idea that scientific and technological innovation alone is going to be in any way, well, it's seen to be improving our lot, but in the absence of any participatory engagement, I don't see how this can be a never-ending cycle. A never-ending sort of narrative. So I'm not so sure. Merely having science or and technology is certainly not going to be in that direction. And therefore, I think a government which seeks to use science and technology as an excuse for bringing in all kinds of aspects of binding and regressive politics. That in my sense is not contradictory at all. That's my view. So one can use science and technology to do that. And just as in AI, I think one could use AI in many different ways, which are not necessarily going to be bad, but how does one begin to have a discourse and dialogue about the applications of these incredibly transformative technologies? I think that's the most crucial thing. It's also like the discussions around nuclear energy and its application. So if people's participation is going to be completely, divorced from thinking about science and scientific, developments, we're going to have we're going to be in the same state. I mean, AI is going to be just as regressive as what we are seeing now, or maybe more. And it will certainly facilitate the current situation.
I'll try and attempt to bring all the 4 questions together, because I think underlying all the 4 questions, there's a certain middle-class morality, if I may say so. Why I say this is, you talked earlier that experts designed Narmada. It's only partly true. Actually, the first bunch of experts rejected the dam because they said the black cotton soil is not good for irrigation. So they shouldn't make these dams. But the moment that happened, they got a new bunch of experts. So there are experts and experts. And we've seen that in the Char Dham thing just now. The Ravi Chopra committee rejected the roads in Joshimath. So immediately they got another committee. They rejected the Ravi Chopra committee. So there are experts and experts, and a lot of the middle class think if only we could be the experts on the sides of the people, things would change. I'm sorry to say you are living in dreamland. Why? Because the agency of the middle class, that time is over. It was there at a time of independence. It's no longer there because fascism has taken over. And the middle class historically sits quiet during fascism. They don't want to disturb their lives. So we have to look at new agents. And my suspicion, I may be wrong, my suspicion is that the new agency is going to come from the laboring poor and the minorities, because they are the victims. And all that the middle class can do, the sympathetic middle class, is to say whether you're going to be on their side or not. It's as simple as that. Yagnik has taken a position. So that's what the middle class can do. They can't do more than that. They can't imagine that they're going to really change education or change modernity or change science. They're not going to do it. And I would only urge, therefore, that at least in my life I have seen it, so I would urge that if you are interested, you should see it. The enormous creativity that lies in the lap of labor. I mean, it's incredible. It's not just artisanal creativity. It's creativity of the mind to think, to rebut, to challenge, to criticize. If we don't bring that into the discussion and keep talking about middle class aspirations, I think we are lost, frankly.
I would,
sorry.
Specifically to the first person who asked the question. When you talk about this whole IT thing, digitization of India, in the last few days we've been hearing about, history being rewritten, different chapters being dropped out of, the syllabus. For me, the most shocking thing was not the Mughals, because anyway, Mughals are going to go, and sometime Tipu Sultan will also go. For me, the whole thing was like, how did they drop Darwin out of the syllabus? I mean, what had Darwin done? So when we're talking about a system which is not inherently progressive. Okay. So we're not talking about a system which is progressive in any way. So what is happening is, just because we have IT and we have now the Aadhaar card, which was there, and the PAN card before that, and all this, these numbers by which we are defined today, they are, in my opinion, personally, are just a means of surveillance. And if you're going to use, IT to actually, keep tabs on people, so that is the way to go. If something else comes tomorrow, they're going to use that and they're going to drop IT. So it is not, I would not personally see IT as, this whole digital India as a way of, India progressing. I would just think of it as, some way to keep, tabs on people. Now, your Aadhaar card and your PAN card has to be linked. Tomorrow, your Aadhaar card, PAN card, voter ID, and your phone number has to be linked. I mean, things are going to go in that way. So then there's something really interesting that I found, which I can just take a moment and read. I also tried out this chat GPT thing just to see, what it is all about. And I logged in and I said, what is Bharat Jodo Yatra? And this is what came up. It said, Bharat Jodo Yatra is a political campaign launched by the Bharatiya Janata Party in India. I mean, this is what I got, and I kind of used it as my Facebook cover for a very long time. It is to unite the people of India and strengthen the country's cultural and social fabric. The yatra involves BJP leaders and workers traveling across different regions of the country to connect the people and spread the message of national unity and integration. The campaign also focuses on highlighting the achievements of the BJP-led government and the efforts towards building a strong and prosperous India. This is what, this is what artificial intelligence is, and this is what it threw up. So we have not progressed. I'm sorry.
No, with the help of Dr. Satyajit Mayor, I want to digitalize Ganesha. Sir, tell me whether Ganesha is a reality or a myth. Was the operation on Ganesha possible 2000 years ago? If the lady who does PhD from Harvard, where if you discussed about, it is not to you in particular, but when you discussed about the present situation in Harvard or Yale or Columbia, that secularism is only confined to the letters of the law, according to the political dispensation of the day, you are bound to get a scholarship, sir. But when you criticize that no, Ganesha is a myth, and the operation could not have happened, then the actual question would be that a rabbit can be implanted in a human being in United States, but in 2000 years ago, you can't envisage this situation in India. Sir, let us digitalize Ganesh. Help me, sir. Please, sir. We are in a technological era, technological revolution, Amrit Kal. Let us do it. And then we come to the environmental issue of connecting through Ramasetu between Sri Lanka and India. Do you believe that Ramasetu existed, sir? You are a man of life sciences. You are discussing about this island where I can't go, and you do not want India to develop, sir. What are you? You are a man of science or a man of regression, sir? Please answer that. You'll have to take a position now. When it comes to taking a position, let me tell you, majority of us do not take a position against the dispensation of the day. Simple. Abhi Ramaseta ka, Samse O Sanstha ka, Sanatan Dharma ka, if 50 representatives come here, 90% of us would run away.
I have to interrupt you here because we do have questions to be answered and other panelists to speak. I was wondering if Vasavi, you would like to say something in response to the science question, and perhaps both of you as well to the question of imagination and so on. And I thought.
On the question of modernity and science, I second what Satyajit said. I mean, a lot of literature now documents that there is no neutrality of modernity, and therefore the co-option of modernity and technology into conservative or fundamentalist movements are well known. So it's really not a contradiction. I want to just respond to the last query about awareness and education for children. I think that's really important. That's something that we really need to do, and not just about some of the issues we've looked at, but very, very basic issues about understanding hierarchy or confronting hierarchy. That's what we see especially. And I think that is really the bedrock of all the deficits we see in our society and in our political system. So I think working at school levels, I think is is a must now. It's something that we can't negotiate at all.
On the whole issue of the way we technocratize everything, I think we have to remember that modernity started off as an ethical project, and somewhere along the way has been hijacked into an aesthetic project, where people construct an image of what society, a proper image. And actually an ethics by which we continuously construct modernity is not being given attention. On tackling conservatism and fascism and a lot of these things, I think we have to not try and try to argue for superior alternatives. Yeah, we need to do that also, but the job is not going to be done just by saying we should have secularism and justice and those principles. We need to fight for those causes. But we also have to, at the same time, critique them on their own terms, their own vulnerabilities. If Hindutva says Hindus need protection, we should show that this is actually demeaning Hindus, because it is saying Hindu gods need human protection. They're so weak. Or to say that our faith is so vulnerable that your faith is so vulnerable, you are bothered by what someone else is doing. Why should your faith be so shaky? So I think we need to use that argument also. On the question of AI, and actually there is a technical term used in the AI community to describe the response that you got. It's called hallucination. I'm not joking, it's that's the word the community uses. And there's a talk I heard by a neuroscientist called Anil Seth, who said we keep hearing about artificial intelligence, no one talks about artificial consciousness. And he goes on to argue that that's because consciousness is inextricably tied to being a living, breathing being, embodied being. And there are a lot of things that only consciousness can do which intelligence cannot do, like compassion or care or love or beauty. These things. So I think we have to make that differentiation and start looking at what consciousness needs to do and sort of look at what our own consciousness is, which is actually a miracle that science has not explained it as yet and probably never will. And that brings me to the last question about how do we awaken consciousness in schools. And I think I'll cite the statement by Socrates, who said that education is about kindling a flame, not filling a vessel. And I think that's so. I think it's a mistake by saying how do we awaken the consciousness. Our children have that consciousness. You know, the wisdom of the labor that Dunu mentioned, the labor classes, is because that consciousness is there, and we just need to nurture it. And there's a wonderful line by Italo Calvino, I don't remember the exact wording, but what he says, the inferno, a notion of hell, is not something that awaits us. It is already there, it's a part of life. And there are two ways of dealing with it. The first way, it says, you become so much part of the inferno, you no longer see it. But the second way, which requires constant vigilance, is to seek what in the midst of inferno is not inferno and give it space, allow it to endure. And I think that's a strategy we need to use.
Thank you, Iman. Would
I
you
just
like
wanted
to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of say one thing about the technology, which, I mean, there is no going back on it. But increasingly what we are also seeing is that technology being used to kind of targeting the poor, I mean, penalizing the poor in a way. I mean, two examples that I can give is using the kind of fingerprint for the PDA service. In Rajasthan, rural areas where there is no internet, a lot of them are being denied because this is not getting connected to. And another is the old age pension, which is directly kind of sent to the bank to supposedly avoid corruption through the postman and others. One is that old age pension, they need to reach to the bank is one And another is that through bank charges, they are those who are not keeping a minimum balance in the bank is penalized, and who are not able to kind of keep a minimum balance are the poor. So you are penalizing the poor being there. So technology, while it has a lot of other advantages, is also kind of used as a tool to kind of attack the poor in a very big way.
Thank you, Janaki, and it's just a provocation actually I got from Dunu and Yagnik Saab, and also to your question when you raised this question. Because Dunu is older to me, so probably you've already entered the age of fascism. I just, in the lunch break, I said it's knocking at the doorsteps. And then Albert Speer, you pointed out, when you were relating him to our great Bimal Patel. So my point is, actually, if you see the era of Hitler, when there was this strong alliance between the elite and the mob, the modern context, it's the elite, mob, and the technology. I think that's what is really playing in the, and I think just because that provocation came, so I thought. And you must watch one very magnificent serial that's on the Netflix called Layla, what the ruling dispensation wants to bring in, where they want to keep the Muslims, the Dalits, and on top of that, the technology that's going to. It's a before it gets off the Netflix. Just watch that, Layla.
Thank you for that. I think I'm going to use the privilege of having anchored this extremely interesting session to say a few words, partly in response to the young person who had the query about history as well. First of all, I would perhaps even disagree with some of the very distinguished panelists who are seated here in disparaging the middle class, because I think all of us are members of the disaffected middle class, both those who are seated on the stage and those who are seated in this audience. And we would not be where we are if we were not thinking differently about the kinds of problems with which we are faced. So let's not put ourselves down. Having said that, I also want to say, and it's in response, I think what I'm sensing here is great anxiety, and I think we are all gripped by this anxiety because we haven't all reached the Gujarat model yet, but we are almost there in terms of this total sort of, swamping of civil society and human life by a single party and its ideology. But I also, like some of those who spoke today, take hope from the very, very heterogeneous country in which we live. And I say this as a historian and partly as a response to the question about history. While it is true that every effort is being made to sanitize history, to expunge certain periods, certain mention of certain rulers or certain aspects of our very complex past, it is also true that there is a very large and widespread interest in history which has been sustained precisely by those people without histories and who are discovering the necessity of spelling out those histories. I'm talking about Dalits and tribals, pastoralists, and so on and so forth. If I can make a small plug here for those very NCERT books which have been under the scanner, they attempted to actually represent that wide and very complex range of questions that historians are faced with. And I think it did it successfully. It did it successfully for almost 15 years. I think we should take courage from the fact that these books have not been yet rewritten. They're still being tampered with. And I wonder why. I wonder why over 9 years it has not been possible for this regime, which has so much power, to write its own textbooks. Why is it that they are still tinkering with this? There is something that they are incapable of at this current juncture, or at least we'll have to see what actually emerges. But I'm saying this because I'm currently in conversation with groups of people whom I call community historians, and believe me, they are not speaking the language of the state. They are actually recovering local histories, preserving local histories in ways that give me hope. And I don't think these can be easily swamped by the changes in the textbooks. So let's put the textbooks back in the small corner where they belong. They do not account for all historical accounts. They are not going to transform, I think, the way in which we think about history, because there is so much vibrant and very sort of creative thinking about history that is happening at so many other levels. And we have to pay attention to those kinds of, just as, Dunu has expressed the optimism about the fact that, and I think Vasavi expressed it too in her main talk, that, there is so much sort of knowledge that is embedded in people who actually work the land, who work with machines and so on and so forth. Likewise, we have a lot of historical knowledge that is embedded in communities to which perhaps we now have to turn our ear. And I'm not actually entirely discouraged in the current scenario. We have to think of ways in which those can be preserved, and that might still be a challenge. But nevertheless, they do exist. And we should do our best to pay attention to these. Having said that, I think this was a wonderful panel, very challenging, inspiring, certainly expressing a certain pessimism of the intellect, but also equally expressing an optimism of the will. And I think that's what we have to take forward. The ESG has already pioneered that path of relentlessly fighting for issues which seemed, I'm sure, at points rather hopeless. So this is what we should go away with from this panel. Thank you very much.